I'm joined by Kevin Sanders, Director of Special Projects at the War and Peace Foundation in New York. Kevin Sanders, you've seen how the UN works up close. How fit for purpose is it, taking into account its venerable age and the venerable age of its original design?
Well, maybe it's a reflection of my age, but I'd like to think it gets better as it gets older. Certainly in the case of its proposal to expand the Security Council, of course, this has been 40 years in the making, in fact more. When it was first begun, there were objections to the idea of the Security Council being, as it were, a gathering of the victors from World War II, and the fact that they were also all the big nuclear bomb people, and they excluded anybody else under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty from having the bombs. From the very beginning, there were serious weaknesses in the whole idea of the Security Council. As the years have gone on, this has become ever more of a problem. So it is encouraging, in fact it's exciting, to see that at last the United States has obviously agreed now to take the lead in this move to expand the Security Council, which means that it almost certainly will happen. When, it is not clear, but at least the discussions are now underway. There's a deadline for how long the discussions can drag on. It has to end by April, and then some proposal has to be made and something has to be done. So one way or another, things will get better as it gets older, as it gets a Security Council that is somewhat closer to being a democratic body, which at the moment it certainly is not. Whether it's going to satisfy everybody is another thing. Obviously, there will be some people who will still feel that they have been excluded and should have been in, and that will continue. But it will be a major advance now with America taking the position it has, and very clearly and very articulately and very forcefully under the new ambassador, the United States Ambassador Susan Rice. Her declaration has left no doubt at all that America is going to at last take the lead in expanding the Security Council, and that's a good thing. I would go further. In an ideal world, in an ideal Security Council, there may be a very strong case for abolishing the veto power altogether. It's been abused so often, it probably would be better if it were abandoned completely.
But there are other organs of the United Nations that are, creaking even worse than the UN Security Council is. Where do you think the greatest need for reform exists?
Well, there's one which is probably my hobby horse. I don't hear a great deal of enthusiasm from any quarters really to do this, but I would really like to see the Military Staff Committee re-invoked, strengthened, activated. The Military Staff Committee is a small office at the United Nations, which hardly anybody knows about and hardly anybody cares about. It hasn't done anything. They have regular meetings every 2 weeks. The military leaders of the 5 permanent representatives of the Security Council meet in private and never report on what they talk about or what they do or what they're supposed to do. But if you read the Charter of the United Nations, the Military Staff Committee is an organization that brings together all the military forces of the world at the request of the Secretary General of the United Nations. In other words, here is a force that can be brought together under the United Nations flag to carry out the United Nations requirements, to enforce when enforcement is necessary, and that the command is not in the nation states, but the command is under the Secretary General of the United Nations, and indeed the Security Council of the United Nations, which advises him. Now, this would be a major change. I think that this could really be a major step toward a permanently peaceful world. And so therefore, one of the great reforms I'd like to see at the United Nations would be re-invoking the Military Staff Committee. That's yet one. I'd like to see, of course, something like a world energy body. Energy is the big problem facing the world for the next 20 years. I think that the United Nations should be better engaged in, other than only having a United Nations International Atomic Energy Agency.
I have to interject that we are out of time, and that was Four Corners. I'd like to thank my guests for their evaluation and you for your attention.